Before we start the movie, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you can receive all the new content we bring. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, you'll find the link in the description box. The movie begins with a house on the beach where a man named Ted lives with his wife Marion and their daughter Ruth. On the walls of the house hang a few framed photos of two boys. These are the sons of Ted and Marion, who died in a car accident a few years earlier. Marion, the mother of the boys, and Ted have not recovered from the tragedy, and she has been suffering from depression ever since. One day, Ruth, Ted's daughter, was in the gallery of the house when her eyes fell on the pictures hanging on the wall. She asks her father about them, but Ted asks her not to think about them. They were pictures of her deceased brothers. Ruth insists that her brothers are still alive, but her father tells her that it's time to forget them. Ted is a children's book author and artist, always busy with his work, so he hired a woman named Alice to take care of Ruth. Ruth is very curious and often stares at the displayed photos, believing that her brothers will come back to her one day. One day, Ted asked his wife Marion to go out with him, but Marion was so deeply immersed in her depression that she didn't answer him at all. Later that night, while Ted was asleep, Ruth came to him and said she had heard voices and thought her brothers were calling her. He takes her to the gallery to help her get rid of the illusion, shows her the photos again, comforts her gently, and then returns her to bed. As he tucks her in, he tells her stories about her brothers. After Ruth falls asleep, Ted goes back to his book. The next morning, Marion went out to pick up a young man named Eddie. She met him, and they talked and got acquainted. Through their conversation, we learned that Ted had quickly hired Eddie as his assistant. Eddie also mentioned that he would be his driver, since Ted's license was suspended because of drinking alcohol, so Ted had no choice but to employ Eddie. Eddie hopes to learn writing while staying there. Marion takes him to Ted's house and leaves. Upon arrival, Eddie meets Ted, who in turn introduces him to a doctor named Romy. Later, when they entered the house, Eddie told Ted that he had already read many of his books and that his favorite was The Door in the Ground. Eddie told him he also loves writing and wants to learn how to write books from Ted. Ted begins to confide in Eddie that he is unhappy with his wife Marion. That's why he stays here at the beach while renting another house in the city where Marion lives separately. He then explains Eddie's responsibilities, telling him that he will need to travel back and forth to the city frequently to meet his wife, and that the job could be somewhat demanding. When Eddie meets Alice, she starts asking questions about him. Eddie explains who he is and why he is working there, and then Alice leaves with Ruth. The next morning, Ted was seen with a woman who turned out to be there to satisfy him. Ted seemed already tempted, drinking and watching her with lust. Meanwhile, Eddie saw Ruth standing in front of the photo, talking to it as if having a conversation, but he kept silent. That night, Eddie went to the cinema with Marion. During the film, he kept staring at her, although Marion didn't realize he was gazing at her with tenderness. After the movie, as they left the cinema, Marion asked Eddie what he thought of the film, but Eddie, absorbed in her presence, had little to say. By the time they returned home, dawn had already broken. Marion said she enjoyed watching the film with Eddie and invited him to dinner. Eddie happily agreed. During dinner, as they enjoyed each other's company, Eddie began to feel a strange attraction toward Marion. One day, while Marion was walking on the beach, Eddie quietly watched her from a distance. Eddie seemed drawn to her. At home, Eddie secretly looked at Marion's clothes, but at that moment Marion walked in and caught him. Eddie felt embarrassed and apologized. Marion kindly told him these feelings were natural at his age and nothing to be ashamed of. She said she was glad someone thought of her that way. They started talking more and more, discussing various things including love, and it seemed they were gradually getting closer. By now, Ted and Marion were sleeping in separate places. At night Marion stayed in the beach house, while Ted went to the rented house in the city. Eddie also began spending nights at Marion's house, and their meetings became more frequent. One evening, Marion and Eddie went out for dinner again. During dinner, Marion told Eddie that he was a good man for his age. Hearing this, Eddie tried to make her laugh by telling a joke, but she didn't laugh. Then Marion jokingly asked him if he was involved with Alice. Clearly, she was trying to figure out who Eddie really liked, but from his reply, she discovered he didn't have a girlfriend. She jokingly asked why he didn't ask Alice out on a date, but Eddie said she wasn't his type. Marion told him Alice wasn't a good woman and that she didn't take proper care of her daughter Ruth. Marion still loves her husband, but she could never get over the death of her sons, and for that reason, she could not truly love her daughter Ruth either. After she said this, she looked again at the photos of her sons in the gallery. Night fell, and they both went to their rooms to sleep, but Eddie couldn't sleep, his mind filled with thoughts of Marion. Suddenly, Marion entered Eddie's room. She seemed in a different mood, romantic. She asked Eddie, "Have you ever been in a relationship with someone?" Marion appeared to be trying to seduce Eddie, burning with desire. She spoke with passion and tenderness, then began undressing. Eddie didn't want to miss this moment. He already understood what was in Marion's heart. He approached her, and that night they made love. For the first time in years, Marion felt true love. Afterward, Eddie told her how wonderful he felt with her. The next morning, they went for a walk on the beach, and Ted noticed them walking together, though he wasn't entirely sure there was something between them. And Ted, always busy with his work, didn't have the time or space to think about such matters. He was absorbed in working on his next book. Later, at a party with Ted, Eddie noticed that Ted had the habit of flirting with young women, and Eddie realized why Ted didn't love Marion. On their way home, Ted told Eddie, "I saw Marion smile today after a long absence." Eddie didn't answer, but Ted began to suspect that Marion might be in love with Eddie. Eddie, however, acted wisely and avoided Ted's suspicions. The love between Eddie and Marion continued to grow, they spent more time together. But Eddie also made sure to perform his duties as an assistant. He didn't want Ted to discover their affair. He even played tennis with Ted and made sure to lose. He didn't want Ted to feel threatened or suspicious. The next morning, while Eddie was heading somewhere with Ted, Ted confronted him about his relationship with Marion. Ted said, "I want a divorce from Marion, but I need your help. I want custody of my daughter Ruth." At home, Eddie told Marion that Ted was not a good man, but Marion defended him, saying that Ted was a good father who took good care of Ruth, and that his only flaw was his obsession with painting, which she deeply hated. She explained that at the beginning of their marriage, Ted used to paint pictures of her, and that greatly annoyed her. Later that night, while Eddie and Marion were together, Eddie mentioned her sons. The moment he asked, Marion was deeply affected, overwhelmed with memories of her deceased boys, and she began to cry. That night, Eddie saw Ruth looking at all the photos. Ruth asked him if she could take one picture to her room. Marion agreed, but Ruth accidentally dropped the picture, and cut her finger on a broken piece of glass. Eddie and Marion quickly took her to the doctor. When Ted found out, he was furious with Eddie for giving Ruth the photo, scolding him, saying, "That's Marion's job, not yours." That night, Ruth had another terrifying dream and woke up crying. Ted felt awful and tried hard to comfort her but failed. Then Marion entered and immediately calmed Ruth down. Seeing this, Ted realized that after their divorce, Ruth should stay with Marion, because she was so happy with her. The next day, Marion suddenly began to cry, as the memories of her son came rushing back. Eddie tried to comfort her, but Marion told him that she planned to leave soon, and this time she would not return. That same day, Ted asked Eddie to deliver all his paintings to Evelyn's house. He said, "I'm done with her now, and I want to move on." When Eddie arrived at Evelyn's house, she was furious. She had invited Ted to visit her, but he hadn't shown up. Eddie told her that Ted must come to see Evelyn on Friday. Then, out of sheer frustration, Evelyn accidentally locked herself out of her own house. In the end, Eddie broke one of her windows to get back inside. That evening, Marion told Eddie, "On Friday, when Ted goes to Evelyn's house, don't pick him up. If Ted is forced to walk back home alone, it will take longer, and during that time I'll gather all the boys' photos and leave this place forever." The next day, Eddie drove Ted to Evelyn's house, and Evelyn, extremely angry, tore up all the paintings Ted had sent her. Eddie dropped Ted off and went back home. Then Marion sent Ruth with Eddie to the doctor to have her stitches removed. Marion said, "If Ruth is here, I won't be able to leave." Meanwhile, Evelyn followed Ted in her car. Ted barely escaped by running to the beach. After Ruth's stitches were removed, Eddie stopped at the photo shop to pick up the broken picture that Marion had sent to be repaired. Eddie asked for the photo, knowing that Ruth would be terribly upset if she returned home and found neither her mother nor the picture. But the shop manager refused to give Eddie the photo unless Eddie wrote a letter explaining everything and told the whole story, including his relationship with Marion. After reading the letter, the manager came out from the back door, clearly moved by the story. Finally, the clerk gave Eddie the picture. Meanwhile, Ted went to his office, where he had many fans. He began signing autographs for them, and there he noticed two young women who were among his biggest admirers. He asked them if they could drive him home. Instead, the girls first took him to their house, where he changed clothes. Then Ted told the girls and their mother that he wanted to paint them, and they happily agreed. With their help, Ted returned home quickly. Upon arriving, he saw Marion leaving him. He turned to look at her but said nothing, and Marion walked away quietly. This time, she moved to New York forever. Some time later, Eddie returned with Ruth. Ted, furious, slapped Eddie, even though it wasn't his fault. Angry, Eddie punched Ted back, just as Marion had advised him to do if Ted ever tried to hurt him. Eddie told Ted that Marion had left forever and that she had taken all her son's photos with her. Now Ted had no pictures left of his children. Ted was shocked and heartbroken. He expelled Eddie and ordered him to leave immediately. After Marion's departure, dealing with Ruth became very difficult, and even the babysitter Alice quit her job. Ted was devastated. Then he opened his heart to Eddie about the tragic accident that killed his sons. Ted explained, "That night, Marion, I, and the boys were all drunk. The younger son, who wasn't experienced in driving, was behind the wheel. Snow had built up on the front and rear headlights, but I forgot to clear it. Because of the poor visibility, our car crashed into a truck on the highway. Our two boys died in the accident." Ted added, "We had Ruth afterward, hoping it would ease the pain, but it never worked." Eddie felt awful hearing that, but he still couldn't understand how a mother could leave her daughter. The next day, Evelyn's servant came to meet Ted and told him that Evelyn had fired him. Hearing this, Ted hired him as his driver, and then also hired his wife as a cook and caretaker for Ruth. After that, Eddie said goodbye to Ted and left home. Ted's new driver and his wife began taking care of Ruth, and with this, the movie comes to an end. If you liked the movie, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you can receive all the new content we bring.